It's nice to see everybody. It's a small crowd, but that allows us to have more time for discussion, and more attention in the Q&A. So, and it gives me a chance to practice before I have to do this before a much larger audience in a few weeks. So I'm delighted to see you all here, but I'm going to use the words estranged, rift, cut off, and maybe some others that you saw on the cover of the book interchangeably. And they're basically all synonyms. So don't be confused by that. The subtitle is Whether to Repair a Painful Relationship Rift, and if you do want to, how? So I am not assuming that anyone should repair or reconcile or need to or have to, but I do have a bias that in most situations, it's better to be able to, and we'll discuss why that is. Okay, I'm going to go run through an agenda, an outline of what I'll discuss. And if you can't resist, unmute yourself and I'll call on you and ask a question. But there'll be hopefully a lot of time at the end. First of all, try to think of someone you've had a cutoff with, someone you cut off or who cut you off, or someone you know about. And a good current example is very common and well known. It's Britney Spears and her father, who are not speaking, and it's all over the news and all over TV right now. So that's one option. But if you think for a few minutes, you'll come up with other examples, and I'll be giving you case examples as we proceed. So think of a cutoff. The next topic is whether you should try to reconcile or repair, and I'll give you a bunch of reasons to do it and some not to. Third, why would anyone want to write about cutoffs? It's a very painful subject, and there are much lighter, happier topics. But I spent most of my time in COVID thinking about it and writing about it. Shows you my inclination. Fourth, why did I come to write about it? What is there about me that made me choose this? What's my story? Fifth, what's a cutoff? Because defining it was not so simple. Next, sixth, there are 10 types of cutoffs that I identified as I went along. So we'll just go through those, and you may find your cutoff appearing among them. And then you might be curious to know what are the reasons why people cut off. And there are 5 large categories, 5 basic categories. And again, it's helpful to know what they are so you can place your cutoff, or a cutoff of someone you know, or a cutoff you're going to have next week, because if you haven't had one in your life, you probably will. It's only a matter of time. And then finally, if you decide you want to repair, and hopefully this would give you some sense of whether you want to, how do you reach out with maximum chance of succeeding? And then I'll have a book pitch a little bit, and a coming attraction, and Q&A. Consider repairing, not even repairing, if you can't stop thinking about the person, right? If you're losing sleep, that was an alternate title for this book. If you're, staring at the ceiling for hours, if you're depressed, and it doesn't have to be clinically depressed, but if you feel it as a significant loss, even if you're angry at the person, or if you're very angry at them and you can't let go of it. You might want to repair for someone else, right? If if you're a sibling in a family and your brother is cut off from your father and you can't have one holiday together as a whole family, you might consider forgiving your father, take it back, forgiveness is a whole other area, but you might want to consider some level of repair for the sake of the family as a whole, maybe for your mother who can't stand Thanksgiving under these conditions, whatever it is. And simply if you miss the person. And finally, I mean, there are other reasons. I'm only skimming the surface and giving you as much as I can in a short period of time. But one more reason is that that person might be part of your life's history. And while you're not crazy about them, there's a part of you that doesn't want to let them go. Here, this goes. Okay, so those are a bunch of reasons why you might decide to consider repair. Why would anyone write about this, right? It is a painful topic and it takes forever. And as one therapist said to me, it must be pretty rare. It must be a very rare occurrence. And I said, well, have you ever had cut off yourself in your family or your family of origin? And he said, no, definitely not. And then he said, oh, wait a minute. My mother and my sister haven't spoken, in 10 years. There's never any, I didn't think about it because we never discussed her sister, right? And it was absolutely stunning to him. So I start the book with the sentence that I know by heart: scratch the surface of almost any family and you'll find a significant cutoff. It's not rare, not at all. And that leads me to mention what's inside the cover of the book, which is the a little story about the Inuit Indian or Native Canadian, I think, tribe in northern Canada on what's called Baffin Island. They're famous in anthropological circles for the fact that they seem to have 50 words for snow. And even though it's debated forever, apparently it's true. Somebody proved it. And that tells us how important snow is in the lives of the Baffin Island people. What that did was lead me to take a look at how many words for estranged I could find. And it went on for weeks and weeks, and I'd get excited every time I got another one. And I still don't believe it. And I'm stretching this a little bit, but I found over 100, okay? So that tells you, we have a problem, Houston. Not every culture has that many words for it. And I'm not even sure that it's a question of modern or ancient or native or first world or whatever you want to call it. It may be a unique American phenomenon, I don't know, but I'm kind of curious. We, in any event, if you look at we have euphemisms for it, like forget I ever knew you or give someone the boot, to all kinds of things in all areas of life, like dismissed, that would be from school, disowned, that would be a will, right? Everywhere you look, there's a word for casting someone off. Excommunicated, think of the Catholic Church. It just goes on and on and on, and of course expelled. And the most recent one is Fauci'd. It's right on the front page, front cover, people who've cut him off like Trump did. Okay, so, and then speaking of Trump, major cutoff artist, the number of people he cut off is astounding, maybe more than anyone else. So continuing on, why did I decide to write about it? And I had never really thought about it seriously before or presented about it, but I realize now that it first came to me from a distance, like a distant star in the sky. Pay attention to cutoffs. I went to a conference many years ago where a pioneer of family therapy spoke, and he asked the professionals in the audience whether they had ever had a cutoff. And he was one of the early pioneers, and someone raised his hand and said, well, I don't have any family, so how could I have a cutoff? And he said, you don't have any family? That's interesting. Tell me about that. And he said, well, I have a brother in Colorado, I think it was, but we haven't spoken for years. And he said, but he's your family. And if you are going to call yourself a family therapist, you have to figure out how to at least explore the possibility of being back in touch with him. So that was my first, oh my God. And then I started noticing it among my clients more. And everywhere I looked, if I did a family history or a family tree, there were people who had cut off. And it often turned out not to be the presenting problem that people walked in with, but the underlying painful thing that was bothering their lives. So there was that. Then I had a cousin who was angry at me and yelled at me on the phone and slammed down the phone. And that was difficult, but not devastating for a number of reasons. But anyway, that was getting pretty close. Then 2 members of my own family stopped speaking, and that hit home. And finally, and I'll talk about it again, I realized I had had a major cutoff in my childhood that I had not faced fully. I knew it had been painful, but I didn't realize, oh my God, that was a serious, serious cutoff, probably a trauma. And it was our beloved housekeeper who functioned as as our housekeeper, as my nanny, and then I thought my grandmother, and then I thought, wait a minute, she was really my mother for the first, emotionally, for the first 3 years of her life. And she had come here during World War II and to visit her own children who lived here, got stuck here and couldn't go back to Norway, and kind of adopted me. I guess I was her grandchild or something. And long story short, when I was 3, she went back to Norway. That was it. Cut off. It was really stunning to me that I'd been studying this stuff for 2 or 3 years, and I hadn't really given it the weight that it deserved. Okay, so maybe you're wondering at this point, what the hell is a cutoff anyway? How do you define an estrangement? And I just want to say that when I started all of this, I had one idea of what a cutoff was. It was a sudden, angry break and no further contact after that. It was one thing and that's it. And I was wrong. So we'll look at that. And now I need my colleague to come here because I want to give you the sense of what the pain of cutoffs and what they can do. And I've managed to recruit. I'm going to change seats with her, okay? Go ahead, change seats with me. we not only have a superb actress, her name is Dr. Harriet Oster. She lives in East Hampton also, and she is a world's expert on infant facial expressions. So,
and also mother-infant interactions.
Oh, mother-infant interactions. But we're going to do the shortest skit in the world for you. I'm just plugging her, so she'll get her own writing done and do a presentation. Okay, so this is an example, as I said, of an interaction that gives me the chills, although I've probably done this skit 10 times already. Okay, I'm setting the scene. It is late October. The nights are getting cold. Two elderly women, that's not us though. We're just playing the parts, right? Strangers are sitting on a park bench, catching the last rays of sun. It's getting cold, you know. I wish I could move south, but I can't.
Why not?
I can't because I'm still hoping my daughter will come back. If I move, she won't know where to find me.
How long has it been?
30 years. Okay. It's still, I don't know, does anyone else feel chilled? It gives me the chills. Look at it, you can see it. Harriet will be my witness. Okay. Thank you so much. Bravo. Okay. Yes, I'll take my chair back. Okay. Now, that is one of the saddest stories I've ever heard. And it's true. I meant to say that. A colleague's mother, who was in her 90s, was the woman sitting on the bench, and a stranger walked up to her and just started this conversation. They were in the park. So, all right, I have to recover. Now, but some of the stories are serious but funny at the same time, so I want to read you a funny one. So it lightens things up a bit. Okay. Yes, this isn't funny, but it is because it takes place at a funeral, and I don't think things are supposed to be funny, but this one turns out to be. Was told to me at a funeral. My mother's working class parents, my mother Marina's working class parents emigrated from Tsarist Russia at the turn of the 20th century. By the 1920s, the family had nearly made it into the middle class in New York City, but they were not yet firmly established and still felt insecure. At that point, my Uncle Sam fell in love with an assembly line worker in his clothing factory, and he married her over his family's objections. A year later, when my mother got married, she invited Sam to the wedding, but not his lower class wife. My uncle planned to go anyway, but his lower class wife, I'm inserting that, hid his shoes so he couldn't go. My mother was so angry that she never spoke to her brother Sam, my father, again. Now, that's a true story too. And I have another very racy one, but I won't do it right now because we have to move along. You'll have to get the book to read it. Okay, so types of cutoffs. Would you believe, I thought there was just one, a sudden, angry, I don't ever want to talk to you again, get out of my sight. That was my idea of a cutoff. But it turns out there are about 10. And I'm going to give you a sense. If you don't want all of them, I can skip over some. But I think it would be useful to read through them and describe just a little bit. If I had faces of some people, but Lynn, do you want them all 10? Yes? No?
Are you talking to me?
Yeah, I'm talking to you.
Oh, yes, I'd love to hear them all.
Okay. You're the only one who's showing your face, so I get you get to know. Harriet and Nils will bear with it, and Steve, you have to bear with it. Okay. Emotional disconnection. A cutoff in the emotional disconnection category occurs when two people who had once trusted each other and openly shared their emotions no longer do, because there's been a breach of trust. Unexpressed dissatisfaction or anger usually accompanies this kind of cutoff. While the parties are still in contact and act as if nothing is wrong, the intimacy is gone and the relationship has a stilted quality. Okay. Then we have an incipient cutoff, or impending cutoff occurs when in addition to being emotionally disconnected, two people experience a sense of foreboding about the relationship. One or both may express direct criticism of the other's views or actions, or threaten to cut off. Red flags signal that problems in the relationship need to be addressed. Then there's a partial cutoff, and I can just run through this. It could be parents of a kid who's divorced parents of a kid who's having a graduation, don't ordinarily speak or have any contact, but they show up for events in relation to their children. That I would say, but they don't communicate the way very positively divorced parents do about their children's well-being and what camps they should go to. It's very segmented. Then there are indirect cutoffs, in which communication between cutoff individuals continue through a third party. It's usually someone who's not personally impacted by the cutoff and someone who's able to be impartial, like a lawyer, right? We interviewed a lawyer for this research who said he had a set of parents who would only communicate through the lawyer, right? Or through their kid, which was terrible. So it was better that they were communicating through the lawyer, or through a therapist, right? Therapists might see each member of the couple separately in the hopes they could eventually put them together, but they don't. So it's always tell him I said this, tell her I said that. It's a situation you may be familiar with, and I hope you have an experience. Okay, temporary cutoff. While I generally focus on the negative aspects of cutoffs, temporary cutoffs are sometimes good. When people get too heated up and they're just going off the rails, sometimes a separation of some kind, it could be 10 minutes, it could be half an hour, it could be a month, to allow for cooling off is a good idea. And then a conditional cutoff. This is one of my favorites that I hadn't thought of until I had to. If you don't, well, here's a classic. If you don't stop drinking or using drugs, I'm moving out. I knew someone who moved out because her husband, she threatened to move out if her husband didn't give away some of their books. He refused, so she moved out for 6 months till he dealt with the books. Now, I'm sure there were other issues, but they're back together and doing very well. And it's a true story. Okay. Here's a preemptive cutoff, which I find fascinating also. Sometimes people cut off out of a fear or conviction that the other person is going to cut them off, so they want to beat them to the punch. And that happens a lot in romantic relationships. I know he's going to dump me, so I'm going to cut him off first. I'll head him off at the pass. And that's fine if the theory is right that you're going to be cut off, but you're sometimes very wrong and lose a relationship that had promise. Okay, we're getting towards the end. Yeah. I wish if this were a discussion group, I could ask you what else you think, what other kinds of cutoffs you can think of, but we're down to the last two, so I'll just rifle through them so we can continue on. Forced or instigated cutoffs, and those are things like orders of protection from legal arm, often against men. And then, let's see, forced. I knew of someone who, a wife who divorced and hated her husband and told her daughter that her father was dead. And then she ran into him on the street, the daughter, and had a psychotic break. It was years later, she ran into her father. It was just an incredible, incredible story. And there are lots of them in relation to, similar to that. How about forced cutoff, meaning Trump separating children from their parents at the border? There's another example. That's a cutoff, And then there are complete cutoffs that were my original idea as the only kind, which were which was no communication, no interaction, even in neutral situation. Complete cutoffs often become permanent, and they're often the hardest to undo. Not always, but often. Okay, one more. Secondary cutoffs, which are intergenerational. If you look at a family tree, very often you'll see cutoffs in each generation going back, that it becomes a family style for how you handle conflict. And it can be corrected in the present generation if the people involved realize that that's what's happened, right? I think I probably have some of that with my grandmother Ray and my Aunt Gussie, who were always not speaking to each other. But I don't know how far back it goes, and with them it didn't last. They lived next door, separate, different apartment buildings, and they'd either be talking to each other or they wouldn't when we would visit. Okay, so that's a big mouthful. There are then 5 basic reasons. Well, should I stop at this point for a few questions? We can do it. I'm trying to watch the time. Few questions or comments, or do you want me to just keep going? I guess.
If anybody has any questions and they'd like to type them in the chat or unmute, please feel free to do so at this time.
Okay. I have to assume that I'm getting across somehow, not going too fast, too slow, to whatever.
Well, I could remember examples of estrangement, hearing stories where, going way back to where you have an individual who perhaps the parents want them to marry one particular person.
Oh yeah.
And they say, if you don't marry Jim, who's say a successful attorney, we will cut you out, disown you, And I've heard, things like that. And then years later, the family comes back and says, that was not a nice thing to do. We should have never did that,
That's good to hear. Yeah, many of these stories end happily, even though you wouldn't, give a nickel for them when you hear the story. It's amazing. You can't predict what's going to work out and what's not. But we'll talk about a couple of strategies towards the end. that you can use if you're looking to mend a fence, as they say. So the 5 categories, and I want to say for this and for the types of cutoffs I just read, there are all kinds of subcategories too, but we don't have time for that, and it's too confusing on a first hearing. So the 5 basic reasons why people decide to cut off or just find themselves cut off. The first one I would say is abandonment. Not the most significant, but just taking them in some kind of order. Abandonment, which is my story of my housekeeper. That's a very good example. She wasn't abandoning me in her mind, but in my mind, no matter what people said, my parents said, what she said, no matter the Christmas card I got or whatever, I was abandoned, no question, right? And next one is people cut off because they're jealous of a friend or a sibling or a spouse. That happens. I have friends who almost cut off, who were both in the same field. And one member of the couple was very successful, but the other member was even more successful. And a jealousy battle ensued that almost broke up their marriage. So let me just read you a tiny bit about that. That would be page 141. Here it is. Okay, this one is fun. Sometimes a person can be jealous of another person's family, having family. It can be an envy that crops up when one friend gets married and acquires a mate, or when a friend has a baby while the other has fertility problems. It can be an older parent who envies his friends with grandchildren of his own children, despite efforts to hurry them along, show no signs of delivering. Okay, so here's the story. It's in the newspaper. A young couple wrote to Philip Galanis in the New York Times Magazine section a number of years back. Actually, I think it was just the wife, complained about friends who threatened to never speak to them again if they stole the baby name the friends were planning to use. Okay? Apparently, this happened on 4 different occasions, and the couple added that some of these threatening friends were still single. So is that crazy? I mean, it's crazy, but it explains that's jealousy. They did just pure and simple. And by the way, jealousy isn't all that bad. It's only if it spills over into acts of action of hostility or betrayal or cutoff or whatever you want to say. As long as people can manage their jealousy, a friendship can go on, right? It just depends on how bad it gets and when the line gets crossed, which is something that fascinates me. What makes people cross over the line? I don't know. That's my answer to that one. If you have a theory, I'd love to hear it. So next is betrayal, which is, I think, my favorite because it's so evil. And I start off with Dante in the book. I can't help it. I got really curious about Satan and the worst things that people do to each other. So I can read you the little piece about Dante. If you have, has everybody read Dante at one point, the Inferno, or know about it? Flynn, no? Okay. Dante in the 14th century epic poem, Inferno, which I read in college and flunked the exam on, but that's another story, meticulously categorized sin. He then assigned the reader the sinner to one of 9 descending circles of hell to receive everlasting punishment. If you have dared to betray a family member, community member, or a benefactor, somebody, a mentor, I suppose, after death, you will go straight to the lowest circle of hell, whether you are remorseful or not. There in the 9th circle, you are frozen forever in a lake of ice. Right below you in the center lies only one other character, Satan, who betrayed God. Not good, right? So if you're in the 9th circle, you're in trouble. Now, in cases of betrayal, the person who betrays crosses a line, usually one that the other person has drawn. And it is this boundary crossing that causes the other person to end the relationship. The boundary may be a matter of custom, overtly expressed, or tacitly understood, such as a felony, stealing something from you. Mr. Nils, remember Mr. Bruun? We ended a friendship basically because a friend stole a painting he had given us. It's a long story, and we were not happy. So that was the last straw. It wasn't the only thing that happened. Let's see. Or it could be incest is, you know, if you look at it objectively, it's crossing a boundary. It's a lot of other things too, but society has said that is not a good idea and drew the line, and that will almost always lead to a cutoff. And let me see, it could be simply a broken agreement, like divulging a secret or publicly embarrassing a spouse. And betrayal, like jealousy or abandonment, will be even more apparent if the one betrayed is experiencing or perceiving it as a repeat offense or as a grim reminder of an earlier betrayal. So that gives you a sense of the hotness, you know, of betrayal. Basically, nobody likes it very much. Nobody likes being betrayed. Now, then we go to matters of principle. And we've been living through a time where all kinds of friendships and relationships, including marriages, have broken up over politics, which is a kind of principle. So I don't know if I need to go into detail on that just to save time. Lynn, what do you think? Yes or no?
I think that's more of an obvious thing right now about the political cleaves that people have in their family and stuff like that.
It's more what?
It's more obvious now. I think people have
Yes.
discussed that and analyzed it.
Right. My values conflict with your values. I can't stay with you. I mean, it's that kind of thing.
Yes.
Okay.
I
So-
have a question for you. I don't know whether it's appropriate to ask at this time, but I want to get it out. First of all, I'm overwhelmed at the number of words there are, and obviously the words are, and you said there's subcategories, the number of situations in which people are, for lack of a better word, estranged.
Yes.
Now, these all seem to be negative experiences, which of course they are. But is there any way you can address when the estrangement becomes a solution to a long-going problem?
Yes. What is it? You just gave me the segue into the next section, because it's about repair. And the point that has to be made is that it's a caveat too, not every situation has to be repaired or should be repaired. In fact, some shouldn't. And those are cases in which there's some kind of ongoing abuse that can't be corrected, and where the person who's been abusive is pretty happy with the way they behave, then there's almost nothing you can do. And I have to say it leads right back to Trump, right? You don't make up with him because he's perfectly happy with abusing you. There are situations in which people actually learn from their mistakes or from their behavior or from the loss they experience over a cutoff or a breakup, and they vow to do better, right? And that's very different. I've had people in my office who've been abusive, but they want to work on it. It would amaze you sometimes who those people are. They're not necessarily famous, but they're miserable that they keep wrecking their relationships and want to do something different. And I find that very moving, and I'm more than happy to help them, you know. So, but in the instance in which you can be pretty sure nothing new is going to happen, and we have the best example in the whole world who just stepped off the presidential podium. It's hopeless. Some situations are hopeless, but not too many, I would say. Does that answer it?
Yes, and also to bring back Trump almost as a verb, I've noticed that people that I've had disagreements with are just general fallings out in a professional sense. I find myself saying, that's exactly the way Trump would defend what he was doing. He's doubling down,
Yeah,
or tripling down. And so it's become almost a part of the lexicon of people screwing up by using bad behaviors that make no sense.
yeah, absolutely. Well, it's self-destructive in the end.
Yes.
You know, you have to wonder what will happen with Trump, but it's amazing that he goes on, you know, without adding up the damage he's done. Okay, so about repair, we can do this very quickly. If you do decide after this whole examination that we just took a quick look at, that you do want to repair a relationship that's gone south, the recommendations are very simple. There are way more in the book, but it's basically go slowly. Don't expect to say, hey, I'd like to get together with you. Let's have coffee and make up after we haven't spoken for 30 years. It just won't happen. So expect that it's going to take time. And that there will be ups and downs, that you'll make some progress, and then there'll be, you know, something misunderstood again, and you'll fall back, and you have to be willing to go the distance, which means it has to be at a pretty, if it's a very serious cutoff, you have to be at a time in your life when you can devote some time to the rebuilding. So you don't have to try when you've got 25 things on your plate and you want to start talking to your mother that you haven't seen in 20 years, you know. It's not the good time. It's always good if you're starting off to try to reconcile or consider reconciling, because that people say, oh, I would never want to reconcile. You can't, most cases you can't know until you give it a little bit of an exploration. So that's a recommendation. You're just checking, feeling what is it? Testing the water to see if it's even something you want to do. But you're recontacting to see how it feels. And you're exploring the possibilities. And then there's the issue of, well, do you have to go through everything terrible that happened? I would say half the people I know who've reached out and explored don't want to discuss what went wrong, and they just want to rebuild and move on, or they do. And it's the other 50%. I can't have a relationship unless we unpack this and discuss it. And then the great part is, okay, how are we going to rebuild? And very often it's something really simple. And I have a great last little story about that. I had a mother and daughter who were at odds, and the daughter had decreed that her mother could not see the grandchild. And she had only one grandchild, and it was killing her. And whenever the mother would say, well, let's talk about it, she wouldn't do it, the daughter. And it turns out that when they had made a little progress, this was a case I had, the daughter was able to say to her mother, I don't want to talk to you because you're an English professor and you always out-talk me. It's like talking to a lawyer. So if we're going to make any progress at all, why don't we just do what we used to do, which was to get together and cook? Because then we don't have to talk to each other much. We're just doing an activity. And I would be happy to do that with you. And they agreed that that was the way they were going to start. And there's, of course, more to it, but that put them on a good path, and they were gone before long, which is great, you know. So you have to be creative about how you want to rebuild, which this family was. There was also a stepfather involved who was wonderful and stepped in to ease the tension between the mother and the daughter, and he was able to be the family therapist after a short period of time. So that's pretty much all I really want to say about the book. Now it's a question of where can you get a copy, and that's very easy. You can buy it. I'm embarrassed, but you can buy it on Amazon. It's up now, and it's not too expensive. Somebody told me today there's a sale on Amazon. I don't know if my book is. It's soft cover. It's totally not expensive. So if you want to buy it, great. And then I have a sneak. I don't know what you call this. I'm calling it, what did I call it? Wait, let me see. Hold on.
A little teaser trailer.
A teaser, but the way they stick them in the movies where you don't know what you're getting, but it's a little surprise. And this is for Lynn because the rest of you know about it. Okay. Can you see it, Lynn? At least the title?
Yes, vaccine.
Gets
Gets the vaccine, right.
Gets her vaccine.
Gets her,
right? Yes.
I see it, right, great.
Okay, this is my new joy in life, which is writing a children's book about a little girl who's extremely feisty. She is not getting her vaccine. And if you want to find out what happens, you have to buy that book. And that's just been put up on Amazon last week. I'm having more fun. I'm not writing for grown-ups anymore. Here's my bow. This is too much fun. Too much fun.
Did you
Lynn,
write that? Did you write the children's book during the COVID?
I did. I wrote both of them, but I had written a book very much like Estranged for therapists before. So it was basically a rewrite, right? So, but Maxine came along. I can tell you, want to hear the sweet story, how I got started? Because I never thought of writing a children's book. I was talking to a friend from 4th grade whose name is Maxine, and we're still friends. And we're both a lot older than 9. And all of a sudden I realized her name was Maxine, and it was when the vaccines had just come out. And I said to her, oh my God, Maxine, your name rhymes with vaccine. Maybe you want to write a book. I said to her, and she said, oh no. And I said, well then do one with me. And she said, no, you do it. So I said, Maxine, you don't know who you're, I guess I'll give it a try if I can use your name. And she said, oh yeah, please. So that's how it happened. And I got a wonderful illustrator too. So by by just saying I needed an illustrator to a bunch of people. Actually, my younger son knew Zoe Mathiasen, who's a wonderful artist, actually.
Amazon and Bookhampton. You could get it at Bookhampton or Barnes and Noble, and also look for the children's book,
Look for Maxine.
which is
If
out
you know
there.
anyone with a 6-year-old or 5-year-old, really 4 to 8. Yeah.
Well, I'd like to thank you and everyone for zooming in this evening, and I hope everybody has a great weekend, and best of luck with Estranged and Maxine.